Everyone, I'm going to keep things rolling so we can keep things moving on time. It is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Bryce Austin. He is a leading voice on emerging technology and cybersecurity issues. Bryce holds a CISM certification and is a known cybersecurity authority and internationally recognized professional speaker. And with over 10 years of experience as Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer, Bryce actively advises the boards of companies in a diverse array of industries. He was the CIO and the CISO of Wells Fargo's Business Payroll Services, a senior group manager at Target Corporation. He's got firsthand experience of what happens to a business and its employees during a cybersecurity crisis, as it did to Target because of their 2013 and 2014 PCI data breach. Everyone, let's give a warm round of applause and welcome to Bryce Austin, our keynote speaker.
Thank you so much. I was in the room when it happened. I was physically in the room. It was November 28th, 2013, and I was having a great day. It was Thanksgiving Day. And after having a meal with my friends and loved ones, I had the opportunity to head to work. I had spent the last 8 months of my life running the programs at Target that would touch the stores themselves, the technology changes that would influence the customer experience, the team member experience. Some things were mundane, new scales in the deli, new Wi-Fi systems, but some of it was at the cutting edge of what retail was going to be. It were things like buy online at Target.com, pick up in a store. How do you do that? How do you make that flexible fulfillment take place? Well, that morning, before the kids got up, I was on the computer, like most of you are, and I came across this article. It was by a gentleman named Fred Williams, who's over in the UK, and they take Thanksgiving much less seriously than we do. And he had noticed something that I thought was interesting. A year earlier, in 2012, the average cost of a stolen credit card on the black market, give or take, was around $10 a card. And by November 2013, that price had dropped all the way down to $4 a card. And his speculation was that the criminals stealing the cards were getting so good at it that the other criminals trying to monetize the cards, to make new ones, to spend things with them, they weren't able to keep up with supply. So the law of supply and demand was kicking in, and I thought that was interesting. And then I didn't think about it anymore. I went to work. We had reporting that was going to be lit up this day on Black Thursday to go all the way to Steinhoffel, the CEO, for him to be able to slice and dice the sales per time zone, per zip code, per individual store, down to a cash register in increments that were so small he could look at it in near real time, and this had never happened before. Flexible fulfillment was coming online this day. Given this was Target, I'll go ahead and give people a chance to guess. What do you think the first thing was that was sold in the history of Target by buying online at Target.com, picking up in a store? Diapers is a good guess. It is not correct, but it's good. Has anyone heard of jeggings? So for the ladies in the room, if yoga pants are not quite your thing, but jeans are far too pedestrian, jeggings are for you. Okay? So what you do is you take a pair of yoga pants and you start painting lines on them to make them vaguely resemble jeans, and then you put them on and people wonder what it is you're actually wearing. And I can say from experience the next day that my butt can't pull off jeggings. Okay? Team bought me a pair, I tried, it failed. Some things work out, some don't. Let's go back to the room. So it was 5 p.m. Central Time, and at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, the Eastern Time zone lit up, and people started coming into the Target stores. And we had a room maybe half this size with probably 200 people in, packed with people, packed with computers, wall-to-wall projectors, and we could see the feeds coming in from our security cameras, the people coming into the store. We could see folks going after the deals that we had. And within 15 minutes, we had that first instance come up from the reporting system that I mentioned, and it was working. Everything was working. We were already at 40% of the max capacity Target had ever been on, and that made us a little nervous. We'd only stress tested up to 120%, and it was looking good. It was going to be a good day, which means it's a stressful day for us in IT. So 5 p.m., the 10 Central Time Zone lit up, and then we were at 70% of load, and things were holding. We had some cash registers down. We had one store that wouldn't give us security feeds. It was no big deal. And then the next hour, the Mountain Time Zone lit up, and no one cared. There are 8 stores. I call them as I see them. But an hour after that, Pacific Time lit up, and California is a big, big state. And we had some interesting things happen. We spiked to 135% of the maximum load that had ever been put on the primary systems at Target. And they held. And it worked. And the reporting that we had worked. And flexible fulfillment continued to work. And we did not pull a Best Buy where their website went down. Ours stayed up the entire time. We had a successful day. And by 1 a.m. that morning, there were lots of high fives. There were lots of pats on the back. There were a lot of people, including myself, that were confident and happy in a job well done. Because we didn't know. We didn't know that on that day, in that room, at that time, a switch had been flipped. A switch that was put there probably before I ever started. A switch that started exfiltrating credit cards at the rate of millions of cards per hour outside of the point of sale system. Well, a couple of weeks later, when the Secret Service and the FBI came knocking on the door, then we knew. And a couple of days after that, when Brian Krebs broke the story to the world, then everybody knew. It was an interesting experience. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to speak at a conference with Brian, and he talks about how he toiled in obscurity as a journalist until he broke the Target story, and then his world kind of exploded. Funny, mine too. I could relate to that very directly. So my experience in cybersecurity came primarily from financial services. I was in the payroll space, and payroll is a ripe target for cyber criminals, especially organized crime. What they're looking for is the chance to get into a payroll system and to manipulate it. Find some 1,000-person company we do payroll for and make up a janitor. See who notices. Okay? Wait till one of these big law firms runs their quarterly bonus run for $8 gazillion, change all the bank accounts to yours, and never be seen from again. These weren't doomsday scenarios. These were real-world attacks that we were actively thwarting. But when I went to Target, my job was to turn those ideas into customer-facing areas. We weren't on the back end. So I tried to pivot as much of my team as I could into the cybersecurity remediation effort, and I was able to save almost half of them. But on January 22nd, 2014, it was not a surprise to me when there were 600 of us in the same room that we had the war room on Thanksgiving Day. And it was standing room only. And our vice president got up and had a prepared statement saying that retail is a constantly evolving and fast-moving industry, and that leaders in the space must constantly evolve in order to maintain their competitive advantage, and that the positions that we held were no longer part of the go-forward direction of Target. So at the time, I had an 18-month-old son at home and a pregnant wife whose job was much harder than mine, taking care of me and the boys, but didn't pay as well. And I had to come home and tell her that Daddy had a resume-generating event at work that day. That was a hard day. That was challenging. It left me for a long time with a real ringing in my ears, wondering what in the world just happened. I had spent the last 15 years of my career working hard, doing well, being passionate about what my teams did, and it worked. I went from being an administrator in 1999 up to the CIO of one of the lines of business of Wells Fargo in 10 years. I was very proud of where I had come from, and I thought that continuing to work hard would continue to bring good results. And the carpet was ripped right out from underneath me. I didn't have a career plan. I didn't have an idea. I had a lot of anger for whoever these cyber criminals were that pulled this off. And I decided to make a change. I decided that I knew enough about what had happened with the Target breach, and thanks to Brian, so do all of you. This was not rocket science. How is it that we are able to educate other companies, other technology professionals and executives, other non-technology professionals and executives on what these risks really are so that we can make good, educated decisions about them? And that's where my career went. I decided to start a company called TCE Strategy. It stands for Technology and Cybersecurity Education. I am not a good salesperson, but I paid someone to come up with a 10-second elevator pitch, and here it is. TCE Strategy helps you understand the minimum that you need to do to keep your technology risk at a level where you can sleep at night. That's it. That's the whole thing. We act as a Chief Information Security Officer on retainer to small and mid-sized companies. We act as an advisor to the CISO for larger companies. It is a lot of fun. The business is very good. And one of the biggest challenges that we have is educating the CFO that approves your budget, the CEO that's making decisions about, do we launch this new system or do we shore up the one that we have? That's where we play. And I noticed a gap very early on that educating these non-technology executives was an opportunity for improvement. There wasn't a good primer that they would actually read as to how to do that. So I wrote a book about it. It is called Secure Enough, 20 Questions on Cybersecurity for Business Owners and Executives, which I encourage you all to buy often and in large quantity. Now, thankfully for you, the Chamber of Commerce has already purchased a copy for each and every one of you. If you didn't pick one on the way up, please feel free to on the way out. They have already been signed, and after the speech, I'd be happy to personalize them for you. But a big hand to the Sioux Falls Chamber of Commerce for being able to educate you and the people at your company through this media. Thank you so much. So when you give this book to your CFO or CEO, please ask them on their next plane flight, when they close the boarding door of the airplane from the Sioux Falls Regional Airport and they hop off the plane in O'Hare, in LaGuardia, in LAX, wherever it is, they can have more or less read it cover to cover and have a good general understanding as to what cybersecurity is all about. So they know what questions to be asking you and have a lucid, rational conversation. I actually have one company that's preparing a board presentation in June based on the 20 questions in the book. That's a first, and it's really hard not to let my head get above the size it already is because of it. I'm not going to lie to you. But it's been a very good educational opportunity for those that don't understand what these risks really are. So let's talk about risk. Risk response. What are reasonable things to do to a risk response? Well, there are three. You can say, I accept this risk, and I'm going to go with it. When I fly in a plane from city to city, I do not inspect the aircraft myself. I expect the FAA and Delta to do that, and they haven't let me down yet. We mitigate a risk down to a level where we can accept it. I'll tell you, some of the Uber rides that I've taken from the airport, yeah, I've started renting cars. I'm just not comfortable with that risk. The third thing we can do is transfer it to someone else. We can say, this risk is not acceptable to me, so I'm not going to do it this way. I could have hired someone else to give this presentation. I could have done it via Skype, but that wouldn't have been anywhere near as much fun, and I think this risk is acceptable. I don't want to transfer it. But any of those three things are reasonable responses. But what a lot of companies are doing is simply sticking their head in the sand and hoping that nothing bad happens. That's not the right response, because when a bad thing happens, it gets a whole lot worse, a whole lot more quickly, and we're going to be talking about some of those coming up. So, how do we make ourselves difficult to attack? Well, there is no perfect cybersecurity. What I tell my clients is this. Everyone is a potential target, much like a hawk flying overhead looking for his next meal. You have a lot of choices to go with, and typically the bigger the better. However, the amount of work involved to get to it does matter. So we don't want to be the squirrel sitting in the forest about to get picked off by a hawk. We want to be the porcupine. Porcupine's a better meal. They weigh about 5 times as much, but you have to go through a lot more work to get to them. So our cybersecurity platform should be able to make ourselves a porcupine relative to the other squirrels in our industry. Now, this analogy isn't perfect. If we go after a group like Sony, just a word to all of you, if you decide to make a movie about assassinating a sitting world leader, you may piss that person off. Okay? I don't know why I have to say that out loud, but apparently I do, because Sony did, and that person was upset by, and they got hacked 6 ways from Sunday. This is no big surprise. In that area, when they're going after you personally, the level of cybersecurity that you need goes up exponentially. And I do have 2 clients that are in that situation, and we have very different conversations than we do with 95% of the rest of our clients. Most of the time, We don't need perfection, we need porcupine. Transferring risk. So I am an advocate of cybersecurity liability insurance. How many of you in the room are aware that you have a cybersecurity liability insurance policy? Okay, we've got a number. Any of you sell cybersecurity liability insurance? Okay, good. I can talk more freely. So, there are exclusions in any sort of insurance policy against risks that the insurance company deems too big. If you open up your homeowner's or renter's insurance policy, you will find that nuclear fallout is excluded. If you're in California, earthquakes are excluded. You will find that acts of war are excluded. You will find that political turmoil and conflict, there's a good vague one, that's excluded. So we had a company that had a $100 million policy with Zurich for cybersecurity liability insurance. That's a big policy. And in 2017, when NotPetya hit, how many of you know what NotPetya was? Okay, only a part of the room. Okay, great. I'll talk about that a little bit then. So in March of 2017, there was a set of updates to the Windows operating system that as soon as you reverse engineer them, you realized these were nuclear bombs. These were horrible, horrible sorts of bugs. You did not need any sort of credentials beforehand to exploit them. You did not need any system knowledge beforehand to exploit them. And if you did, you got admin rights to whichever box you were attacking. That's about as bad as it gets. So there was a lot of fervor in the cybersecurity community. There were patches put out for all active Windows operating systems. This is March 2017. And in 2 months, these got weaponized. The first time, it was via WannaCry. That's where allegedly the North Koreans were trying out their ability to get some money off of a ransomware type attack. The ransomware part didn't work all that well, but the destruction it caused was huge. We're going to talk some more about that. Next, it was NotPetya. So there, allegedly, the Russians went after the Ukraine, and they did not go after the Ukraine government or country. They went after the businesses that do business with the Ukraine, be them inside or out. And they did it by going after the application that you had to use to pay taxes to the Ukraine government. It's called the MEDOC application. And the Russians got into it, and they decided to put a weapon inside that took advantage of the same vulnerabilities from 3 months earlier. And it would start wiping hard drives. And it hit Merck, the big pharmaceutical company. It hit Maersk, the big shipping company. It hit DLA Piper, the number 4 law firm in the world. They didn't have phones or email for over 2 days. How is it you lawyer with no phones or email? That must have been an interesting time to be at that law firm. So this company, I'll leave them nameless, but you can look it up. They had a $100 million policy, and they invoked it, saying they had severe damages as a result of NotPetya. And Zurich is refusing to pay, saying it was an act of war. Now, this is interesting. This has 3 important takeaways. One, this is a declaration that cyberspace is a battleground. And by definition, cyberspace has no borders. There is no geographical border in cyberspace. Second, there can be an act of war with no declaration of war. Now, we've already reached that pretty thoroughly in Vietnam, but it's still worth mentioning. Third, there can be categorical denial by the person accused of doing it, or the country accused of doing it, that this actually happened as an act of war, or that they were responsible for it, and it doesn't matter. If they can make a credible argument this is how it happened, your insurance falls apart. We can't rely on our insurance policies anywhere near as strongly as we could before this happened last January. Things in cybersecurity become a lot more vague, and we're on our own. Transferring risk is harder. We have to do with 1 or 2, not number 3. 1 is accept the risk as is. 2 is mitigate it to a level that we can live with. So let's talk about how we turn this negative and this doom and gloom into a positive. There have been companies that have made a competitive advantage out of cybersecurity or safety in general. Who is the automotive company that back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s were the only ones saying safety is a competitive advantage? Volvo, that is correct. Volvo decided back in the 50s that safety mattered because the wife of the CEO got into a significant car accident, really got hurt badly, and it wasn't a significant enough car accident to where she should have. Things like a seatbelt, and later on an airbag, that would have saved her. They didn't have those back then. So Volvo invented the first seatbelt. There are competitive advantages to having a reasonable cybersecurity posture, and there are ways that you can minimize your expense on cybersecurity by understanding how these guys work. And if you're spending less on it and getting the same value out of it as your competition, you have a competitive advantage. So we're going to go through some of those. We're going to go through some of these ideas. And if any of you have questions along the way in a group this size, feel free to raise your hand. I'd be happy to take them at the end as well. But that's going to be our goal. What competitive advantages can we bring out of a strong cybersecurity posture? Are you with me? Are you ready? Come on, are you with me? Are you ready? That's what I wanted to hear. There we go. Okay. Competitive advantage number one. Who are these cyber criminals? Well, this slide is a little small for you in the back, and I apologize for that. But we have 5 general types of cyber criminals. One is individual hackers. Who knows who Kevin Mitnick is? Handful. How about Frank Abagnale? Catch me if you can, guy. These are individual hackers. Ironically, neither of them were overly good at hacking, but they were really good at social engineering. These people are more or less, generally speaking, a thing of the past. It's become too lucrative. It's become too organized. We don't worry about them much anymore. Your employees. Now that's a difficult one. It's a touchy subject. I have seen reports saying that employees are responsible for up to 60% of all breaches, and they do it maliciously, and I think that's hogwash. I've seen other reports saying they're responsible for over 90% of breaches, and it tends to not be malicious. I tend to believe that report. I've got both of them outlined in the book. I believe our employees most of the time do not mean to let the company get hacked. I think it's inadvertent. And I think it's either due to a lack of education, which is most of the time, or some carelessness on their part that lets a bad guy in. And as soon as they get in, it's hard to get them out. Hacktivists. So this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. Nissan got hacked a few years ago by a hacktivist group trying to bring attention to the whaling practices of Japan. Now, what an automotive company has to do with whaling practices, I don't know. But I think Nissan left themselves open enough to where they had a competitive disadvantage as soon as someone got in and they wanted to make news for themselves. And Nissan ended up being their cannon fodder. Organized crime. So this is where the money is. This is where the action is right now. These people are educated. These people are organized by definition. These people are looking to find ways to exploit you into stealing your dollars. They could do it by intellectual property. That does happen sometimes, but most of the time, they want to ransomware you. They want to trick you into having a false wire transfer take place. They want to find inside trade secrets and sell them to someone else. These guys are after money, and they are looking for people that don't have a good, reasonable cybersecurity posture to take advantage of. And then finally, we have nation states. Nation states have weapons. They have weapons that we cannot defend against. They are called 0 days. Now, in the interest of time, I don't want to have a long speech about 0 days, but the point of this attack vector is normally they're after espionage. They are not after money. They are after information, just like the senator was saying. And we need to try to detect them coming in. The thought that we're going to prevent them from coming in is a thing of the past. They have weapons that we are unaware of, and those 0-day vulnerabilities, what they are. So for those of you that have as much or more gray hair in the room than I do, when you watch the Star Wars, you know, the good ones, the ones in the 70s that were worth watching. So when Luke Skywalker shot his proton torpedoes down the thermal exhaust vent of the first Death Star to blow it up, that was a 0 day because the Empire didn't know it was there and the rebels did. Well, they have those weapons if you're a nation state against operating systems like Linux, like Windows. I don't have a particular preference one or the other. They all have vulnerabilities. But if we don't know that what you really need in life is a thermal exhaust vent shield, your Death Star might too get blown up. That's the problem. Number 2, how many of you have end-of-life systems? Don't raise your hand. How many of you have end-of-life systems that you can no longer patch that are either part of your core central internal network or even worse, are externally facing? Many of you would raise your hands if you were honest and if I'd asked you not to. So, retiring antiquated technology is not just a cybersecurity play. It is a genuine competitive advantage. And there are some really good examples of where people have used retiring technology as an advantage. Walmart is one of the best. When I get to speak down a little farther south of here, I typically get applause whenever I bring up Walmart because they do a whole lot of good for that area. But in the 80s, the way Walmart became Walmart was because they put $700 million into an ERP system to deal with supply chain logistics. How you get things off the ships on either coast and to your distribution centers, then from the distribution centers into your stores. Sam Walton thought that he could come up with a technology that could shave some dollars and cents off of that part of his business. And he was right. Between that and very shrewd negotiating with his suppliers, they had a pricing competitive advantage that no one else could touch for a very long time. And really, it's only been Amazon that's been able to give them a genuine run for their money. It's funny, Target's actually an older company, but I won't talk about that. The auto industry, so this is one of my favorites. Back in the 50s and 60s, we had 3 automakers in the US. And by the end of the 60s, they were in real trouble. And the reason was this. We had built assembly line automotive plants back in the 20s and 30s, the Depression era, and they were pre-World War II technology. They worked fine, but we had competitors like Japan that not only didn't have that to begin with, whatever manufacturing they did have, it got bombed, it got erased, and we helped them rebuild it. So they had manufacturing plants built in the 50s and 60s trying to produce the same vehicles. And they were able to produce them more cheaply. They were able to produce them with more reliability. And by the 70s, the US automotive industry was in some genuine trouble. And it's really only been about the last 10 years that has come up to where we now have another dominant force in that area. Healthcare. So healthcare, this one's important because it's life safety. How many of you are in any sort of industry where if your stuff stops working, potential life safety things can happen? Okay, we've got a handful. We've got a couple. There typically are. So healthcare was one of the worst that got hit by WannaCry. When we talked about what happened 2 months later after the March 2017 vulnerabilities came out, a lot of the systems that were used to triage patients in the ER were connected to the internet. They were running the Windows XP operating system, and they got hit by this. And there isn't a good way to fix it without sending it back to the manufacturer. So especially in the UK, they ended up diverting patients from ERs that had been hit by this to the ones that hadn't. Now, I don't know if there are any loss of life issues there, but the thought that you can be a doctor without your equipment is unthinkable. The equipment is critical, especially in an emergency room situation. And they didn't have theirs because they got caught with their cybersecurity hackles down, and it was a problem. Boeing. So I'm sorry this is a 737 MAX because the fact those are grounded and there's a genuine design flaw is not part of this presentation. I just can't find a better example than this. So a year after these vulnerabilities came out, Boeing had an issue on their production plant. They had a system that was still vulnerable to WannaCry over a year after the patches had come out, and it shut down their production facility for over a day. Now, I don't know how many millions of dollars a day it takes to run their production facility, but I know it's lots of them. Heck, in the automotive industry, with that just-in-time manufacturing they do, if you have a bumper or a brake caliper or what have you for someone like Ford or GM and you're late with it, it costs you $250,000 an hour as a penalty for shutting down the production facility. Well, these guys got hit with WannaCry a year after it came out, and it shut down their production facility for over a day. If you have systems that cannot be patched, they need to be retired, they need to be isolated, or they need to be upgraded. Those are the 3 choices. And hopefully examples like this can help you help your executives understand the competitive advantage that this represents. Cybersecurity is a feature. So we just talked about Volvo, but there are some others. How many people remember the Apple versus FBI dust-up in 2015, 2016? Now, I have had the privilege of working with the FBI in some active incidents, and I know just how hard a job they have, just how good they are at that job, and just how hard they work to help keep us safe. So I want to keep the political aspect out of this. I want to talk about cybersecurity as a sales point. So in 2015, we had a terrorist act in California, multiple loss of life. This person was among the worst ever born, and he had an iPhone. And typically, when you have terrorists, they know other terrorists. And he had used the cybersecurity features with a PIN and with the phone erasing itself after 10 failed PIN attempts and so on turned on. And the FBI went to Apple and said, we think there could be other terrorists out here. We need to know who this guy knows. Please find us a way to unlock the phone. Well, it wasn't trivial. Apple doesn't have a back door. What FBI wanted Apple to do was to try to pull a chip off of the iPhone, the one that does the wiping after the 10 times, the execution there, and put on a chip that didn't have that feature so that they could guess 1,000 times. I guess it had a 4-digit PIN 10,000 times because that's reasonable to do. They could get in. Well, Tim Cook said no, not because he didn't believe the information was needed, but because you can't uninvent something. As soon as you make it, it is out there. Pandora's box is open. The fact the Australians just passed a law saying there has to be a backdoor in the encryption used in that country is incredibly myopic, in my opinion. It's short-sighted. You can't make a weapon that only certain people know how to fire. It will get out. It'll get out every single time. Well, what Tim Cook said in doing this as the CEO, forget about the moral stance of it. I think I can sell more iPhones having cybersecurity as a feature. And if you look at their advertising from the last month, have you seen the privacy ones that they have coming out now? It's very, very surprising. But now they're touting their privacy features as a feature, which I think is going after Google's and Facebook's business model, where they want to know everything about us because they can monetize that. This is a potential avenue for your company to differentiate themselves on your strong cybersecurity stance. Others have done it, and you wouldn't be alone. I think 10 years from now, the people that don't have a competitive feature of their cybersecurity stance are going to be at a real disadvantage. Easy to use multi-factor authentication. How many in the room know what multi-factor authentication is? Okay, that's not quite enough. There are 3 ways to tell a computer that you are you. There are only 3. If you subscribe to Gartner, they say there are 4. They are wrong. There are 3. One is something you know, like a password. One is something that you have, like if it was your car key. If you have your car key, you can start it, or your particular smartphone. One is something you are, like a voice print, like a fingerprint, like a facial recognition scan. What multi-factor authentication, or MFA, says is pick 2 of those 3 ways, and I want them both before I will authenticate you. So companies have now made this a selling point, and everyone is supporting it. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, they all do. By the way, if you are on Office 365, I am a fan, and I want to say I don't sell it, I don't resell it, I don't make any money off of it. I think it's a good platform. It has become such a popular platform that cyber criminals are going after it hand over fist. There are specific hacking tools designed only to get into Office 365 accounts to perform business email compromise. If you want to Google one, it's called Knock Knock. And I had a client that we think was probably hit by it. So these guys are all embracing multi-factor authentication. If you are on Office 365 and you do not have multi-factor authentication turned on, you are taking a serious, serious risk. I don't want to do any fear, doom, and destruction. Again, I don't sell products, but if you get one thing away from this whole talk, if you're on Office 365 and you don't have MFA turned on, at tomorrow's stand-up meeting, you should talk about what it will take to get your users to embrace MFA. It's not that hard to do. However, we've got Instagram that supports MFA. We have got Snapchat, okay, the things that our teenagers are using to send pictures of themselves to each other that they don't want us to see. That supports multi-factor authentication, and that platform is free. Everyone is supporting MFA, and it is such a competitive advantage in keeping your system secure that I wanted to put a section up about it. It matters that much. Having said that, I want to make sure that we shift gears a little bit here. Let's talk about what happens during a breach, because if you can stop any one of these areas, you can stop the breach. Or at a minimum, you can know what's happening before the FBI and the Secret Service show up at your door the way Target had. So there tend to be 5 general areas of a breach. There's a phishing, there's a hopping, there's a scraping, there's an aggregating, there's an exfiltrating. Let's focus on what happened at Target. Step 1, phishing. So in Target's case, there was a heating and cooling company out on the East Coast that was monitoring all of the freezers, all the refrigerators, all of the HVAC systems up on top for all 1,800 stores. They had to turn in their invoices into a system that Target ran that was on the internet that did not have multi-factor authentication on it. Okay, it was not the heating and cooling company's system. It was only their username and password. How did a bad guy get it? We don't know. Probably a phishing attempt. That's how it happens most of the time. Somebody wrote it down in their truck. Somebody sold it to someone else for $10 because these millennials will do that. Sorry, I didn't mean to pick on millennials. But phishing is a big part of the problem that we have. And good email filtering, good cybersecurity awareness training, and multi-factor authentications are the way to stop this chain in the breach. After that, they hopped. And I want to give some props out here to my graphic designer because I didn't know it was possible to make a sinister looking bunny. I gotta say, that is a sinister looking bunny. So because of a lack of network segmentation in between systems, probably because of unpatched internal vulnerabilities and shared passwords between different environments, the bad guys were able to hop from that invoicing system into the internal network until they found the source code of the cash register. And that was a very, very attractive target. So at that point, they had to get those credit cards. They had to scrape them off the system. How did they do that? Pre-breach, here's what happened when you went into the retail store. Pull out your credit card, put it through the swipe card thingy. It moves the data from itself over to the cash register. Then the cash register moves it into your accounting system, into the mothership. Now, that information is encrypted every step of the way. Typically, the kind of encryption used between the swipe card thingy, or the GPD, the guest payment device, because retail is very acronym happy. So, between the GPD and the cash register, you have got some form of encryption that's typically a function of the kind of cash register and the kind of GPD you have. Then, the cash register needs to move that into the accounting system. And that type of encryption is typically a function of the type of accounting system you have. Be it Great Plains, be it Sage, be it Peachtree, be it QuickBooks, whatever it is. Well, by definition, if you have encryption type A over here and B over here, you have to unencrypt and re-encrypt at the cash register, right? So here's what happened pre-breach. Swipe your card, encrypt the data, move it to the cash register, unencrypt it, re-encrypt it with a new technique, move it onto the mothership. Post-breach, here's what happened. Swipe your card, encrypt the data, move it to the cash register, unencrypt, send me a copy, re-encrypt, move it onto the mothership. It was only a few lines of code. And the way they got into it is to alter the source code at the mothership, at Target Corporate, and then wait. Because you don't fix cash registers. If cash registers have an issue, you re-image them remotely, the same way you guys probably do with some of your remote offices and their PCs. And if you have a physical problem, you don't send someone out to the site. You send a new cash register out and the old one comes back. And it gets fixed physically and then re-imaged. Well, after 8 or 9 months, you've hit 80% of all the cash registers. So Target distributed the virus for them. That was good. After scraping, they needed a way to aggregate that data to some centralized point. When you have that many bees buzzing about, you have to be careful how you do it. So they probably moved it from the cash register system to a server that was part of the accounting system so that it looked like normal traffic, so it didn't raise as many alarm bells. And then after that, they had to find a way to get it out. They had to exfiltrate somehow. If Target was able to have detected any one of those 5 steps, they would have been calling the FBI and the Secret Service, not the other way around. And the number of cards lost would have been far, far smaller. But they didn't. The take home from this is easy. If you stop any step here, if you can detect any step here, you can stop the breach. Or at a minimum, you can minimize the damage. So when you guys head back to your companies and you want to have a conversation, do you need that next generation firewall? Do you need that advanced endpoint protection that doesn't just do signature-based antivirus, it also does behavioral-based antivirus? Do you need that good, robust SIM solution that logs all of your system, that aggregates them, so you have analytics as to what's happening and forensics after the fact? The answer is yes, you do. But you want to put it in the language that the CEO and the CFO understand. And it's the language of business risk. And it's the language as to what is secure enough for your company. The way I like to put it is this. When I'm behind that race car, the whole rest of the world goes away. I have one job in front of me. But the people keeping me safe, it's not my wonderful driving prowess as much as I'd like to think it is. It's my engineers. It's my pit crew. It's the people that built these safety systems. It's the safety folks that are on the track. It is the folks on the other end of my radio. And that's the job that you have for your company. Your job is to be Scotty, making sure that Captain Kirk can do what he needs to do because those Klingon warbirds aren't going to take care of themselves. In this world of cybersecurity, the stakes are high and the threats are real. And because you are already educating yourselves in areas like this, your companies are gaining a competitive advantage. Thank you so much for your time and attention. My name is Bryce Austin. I really appreciate it.